12 kings that came to rule Egypt at the same time is an interesting tale, as is the legendary labyrinth of antiquity. However, both together is amazing and worthy of investigation. So here in this video, we will explore the writings of the ancient peoples and look to the stonework left behind, from labyrinths, tombs, and mummified birds, to the journey of the dead, Thoth, and the halls of Amenti. We shall go deep into antiquity in this video, which will be a multi-part series potentially, so please subscribe, help the channel out, and without further ado, let's get straight into it. Reading through Herodotus' book, Histories, I came across his references to an ancient underground structure, of which 12 kings of ancient Egypt were entombed. The very notion of 12 pharaohs, a name later attributed to the Egyptian rulers through the Bible, ruling at the same time, I found to be most intriguing, as Egypt I always thought had only one king, or maybe two, one for Upper and one for Lower Egypt before the unification, and we shall return to these 12 kings later. Here follows a statement from the Greek philosopher Herodotus of Halicarnassus, written around 450 BCE. Thus far went the record given by the Egyptians and their priests, and they showed me that the time from the first king to that of the priest of Hephaestus, who was the last, covered 341 generations, and that in this time this also had been the number of kings of their high priests." Unquote. Herodotus mentions Hephaestus, who was the Greek god of fire, volcanoes, smithing and carpentry. He forged the famous weapons of the gods, even making lightning bolts for his father Zeus, the Egyptian version of Amun. Hephaestus was rewarded for his works with the hand in marriage of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and the most beautiful goddess of them all, also associated with Isis. Here is Herodotus' full commentary on the labyrinth. So far, I have recorded what the Egyptians themselves say. I shall now relate what is recorded alike by Egyptians and foreigners, and shall add something of what I myself have seen. After the reign of the priest of Hephaestus, the Egyptians were made free. Egypt, however, had always had a king, so the people divided Egypt into 12 districts and set up 12 kings. These kings intermarried and agreed to be close friends, no one deposing another or seeking to possess more than another. The reason for this agreement, which they scrupulously kept to, was this: no sooner were they established in their districts when an oracle gave a prophecy to them that whichever of them poured a libation from a bronze vessel in the temple of Hephaestus would be king of all Egypt. Moreover, they decided to preserve the memory of their names by a common memorial, and so they made a labyrinth a little way beyond Lake Maurice and near the place called the City of the Crocodiles, Crocodipolis. I have seen it myself, and indeed words cannot describe it. If one were to collect the walls and evidence of all the efforts of the Greeks, the sum would not amount to the labour and cost of this labyrinth. And yet the temple of Ephesus and the one on Samos are noteworthy. Though the pyramids beg a description, and each one of them is a match for many great monuments built by the Greeks, this labyrinth surpasses even the pyramids. It has 12 roofed courts with doors facing each other, 6 face north and 6 south, in 2 continuous lines, all within one outer wall. There are also double sets of chambers, 3,000 altogether, 1,500 above and the same number underground. We ourselves viewed those that are above ground and speak of what we have seen, but we learned through conversation about the underground chambers. The Egyptian caretakers would by no means show them, as they were said to be the burial vaults of the kings who first built this labyrinth, and the sacred crocodiles. Thus we can only speak from hearsay of the lower chambers. The upper we saw for ourselves, and they are creations greater than human. The exits of the chambers and the mazy passages hither and thither through courts were an unending marvel to us as we passed from court to apartment and from apartment to colonnade, from colonnades again to more chambers and yet then into more courts. Over all this is a roof made of a stone like the walls, and the walls are covered with cut figures, and every court is set around with pillars of white stone, very precisely fitted together. Near the corner where the labyrinth ends stands a pyramid 240 feet high, on which great figures are cut, and a passage to this has been made underground. Such is the labyrinth, and still more marvellous is Lake Maurice, on which it stands. The lake has a circumference of 450 miles, or 60 sconai, as much as the whole seaboard of Egypt. Its length is from north to south. The deepest part has a depth of 50 fathoms. That it has been dug out and made by man's hands, the lake shows for itself, for almost in the middle of it stands two pyramids, so built that 50 fathoms of each are above and 50 below the water. Atop each is a colossal stone figure seated on a throne. Thus these pyramids are 100 fathoms high, and 100 fathoms equal a furlong, or 600 feet. The fathom measuring 6 feet, or 4 cubits. The water of the lake is not natural, for the country here is exceedingly arid, but brought by a channel from the Nile. 6 months it flows into the lake, and then 6 back into the river. For the 6 months that it flows out of the lake, the daily take of fish brings a silver talent into the royal treasury, and 20 minae for each day that it flows into the lake. Furthermore, the natives said that this lake drains underground into the Libyan Citrus and extends under the mountains that are above Memphis. Having the inland country on its west, when I could not see anywhere the earth taken from the digging of this lake, since this was curious to me, I asked those who lived nearest the lake where the stuff was that had been dug out. They told me where it had been carried, and I readily believed them, for I had heard a similar thing happening in the Assyrian city of Ninus. Sardanapalus, king of Ninus, had a great wealth, which he kept in an underground treasury. Some thieves plotted to carry it off. They surveyed their course and dug an underground way from their own house to the palace, carrying the earth taken out from the passage dug by night to the Tigris, which runs past Ninus, until at last they accomplished their end. This, I was told, had happened when the Egyptian lake was dug, except that the work went on not by night but by day. The Egyptians bore the earth dug out by them to the Nile, to be caught and scattered, as was to be expected, by the river. Thus, this is how the lake is said to have been dug." Unquote. Herodotus speaks of lower levels being out of bounds, but marvelled at the size and scale of the construction, as well as the quality of the engineering. He speaks of Lake Maurice being dug out by the hand of man, and of the underground labyrinth which held 3,000 chambers, with a pyramid at one end. That is also mentioned by historian Strabo 4 centuries later. Strabo was born to an affluent family from Amasya, within the borders of Pontus, which is in present-day Turkey, in around 64 BC. Here follow Strabo's references regarding the labyrinth. There exists still in the nome of Heracleopolites a labyrinth first built, it is said, 3,600 years ago by King Petutius or Tithois, constructed of Parian marble, whilst the columns of other parts were of syenite. This great mass is so solidly built that the lapse of time has been quite unable to destroy it, but it has been badly ravaged by the people of Heracleopolis, who have always detested it. To describe the whole of it in detail would be quite impossible, as it is divided up into regions and prefectures called nomes, 30 in number with a great palace to each. In addition, it must contain temples of all the gods of Egypt, and 40 statues of Nemesis in the same number of sacred shrines, as well as numerous pyramids. Banquet halls reached by steep ascents, flights of 90 steps leading down from the porticos, porphyritic columns, figures of gods and hideous monsters, and statues of kings. Some of the palaces are so made that the opening of the door makes a terrifying sound as of thunder. Most of the buildings are in total darkness. Outside the labyrinth, there is another great heap of buildings called the Pteron, under which are passages leading to other subterranean places." Unquote. Interesting to note that Strabo, being the only other person besides Herodotus to have physically visited the underground complex and to have spoken to the priests, gives a differing account of the person who constructed the labyrinth. Perhaps if these interactions indeed did happen, the passage of time from Herodotus to Strabo, about 500 years, may have seen changes in the historical traditions of the priesthood. In 1888, Professor Flinders Petrie perhaps located the actual site of the labyrinth at Hawara. He believes he found enough of the original foundations had remained to enable the size and orientation of the building to be roughly determined. The labyrinth was about 304 metres long and 244 metres wide. In other words, it was large enough to hold the great temples of Karnak and Luxor. Petrie, though he believed he had discovered the foundations of the labyrinth, described by Herodotus, Siculus and Strabo, and here follows the quote from those individuals. This is Herodotus' Histories, Book 2, 148, the 5th century BC. "The roof is of stone, like the walls." Theodosius Siculus, History, Book 1, 61 and 66, 1st century BC. "This building had a roof made of a single stone." Strabo, Geography Book 17, 1, 3 and 37. "The wonder of it are the roofs of each chambers, as they are made of single stones." Unquote. Could it be that the large stone base identified by Petrie was indeed the roof of the labyrinth? Herodotus also claims the age of the labyrinth to be older than him, though no records have ever been put forward of its actual construction other than Strabo, given a date. The engineering and construction of such an enormous project could go back to the golden age of Zep Tepe, to which was a time whence Egypt was ruled by the gods. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato also contributed to the popularization of Egypt. In his writings, he told about the connection of the mysterious priests of the pharaohs with the mythological civilization of Atlantis. The archaeological survey from around February-March in the year 2008, after receiving permission from the Supreme Council of Antiquities of Egypt, headed up at the time by Dr. Zahi Hawass, who we shall come back to later, a team of georadar specialists from the National Research Institute of Astronomy, or NRIOAG, conducted extensive testing in the area identified by Flinders Petrie. A team of georadar specialists from the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geography conducted extensive testing in the area identified by Flinders Petrie more than a century earlier. What the survey revealed could be one of the greatest ever discoveries in Egypt, some claim. The scanned area showed indication of a vast number of chambers and walls several meters thick. Below the huge stone slab, at a depth of 8 to 12 meters, they found a grid structure of gigantic size, made of very high resistivity material, such as igneous rock or granite. The geophysics research confirmed that presence of archaeological features consistent with descriptions of the lost labyrinth of Egypt. The highly significant findings of the Matterhorn expedition were published in the fall of 2008. The highly significant findings of the Matterhorn expedition were published in the fall of 2008 Scientific Journal of the NRIAG, and the results were exchanged in public lecture at Ghent University in October 2008 in the presence of the Belgian press. However, it was not long after that the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt put a stop on all communications of the findings, due supposedly to Egyptian national security. Louis de Cordier, the lead researcher on the expedition, waited 2 years for the Supreme Council to make the findings public, but by June 2010 it had become clear that they had no desire to do so. Thus de Cordier launched his own website, labyrinthofegypt.com, in order to publicly post the results of this significant research project. The water table has risen in the area due to damming of the Nile River, causing the water from the seasonal river to inundate the area of the labyrinth. All we can do is hope excavations can be launched in the future in order to save and fully explore this ancient wonder. Moving northwards now and leaving Hawara behind, we come to Giza, another place with mentioned underground tunnels and construction. Researcher and author Andrew Collins, who discovered an underground tunnel entrance to what appeared to be a cave system he dubbed Tomb of the Birds. He made the discovery back in 2009 whilst trying to establish his theory that the Giza pyramids lined up with Cygnus, as opposed to the rivaling notions at the time from other researchers such as John Anthony West, may he rest in peace, and Robert Bauval, who believed that the pyramids were built with the Orion and Leo constellations in mind. Andrew managed to find what he believed to be a marker on the ground, which was a mastaba, or early form of Egyptian pyramid, you could say. After going through an old Giza survey map produced by Perring back in the 19th century, he later, while sponsored and funded by the Edgar Cayce Foundation and permission from the Egyptian Antiquities, went on to discover/rediscover and filmed the entrance to the underground cave system and proceeded to investigate inside. The cave was full of mummified birds and other small creatures, which he believes was due to a cult venerating Cygnus. Due to this bird correlation, Andrew, accompanied by his wife, only went so far down the tunnel and decided to go back. Having made the discovery inadequate equipment, they returned a couple of times more, each time going back discovering further inside the vault, finding cut niches in the wall as well as an abundance of red ochre. Each time he returned, he pushed further into the catacomb. After exploring and moving through chambers at a depth of around 350 feet, they came to a narrow passageway, dubbed the Tube. Andrew's wife, Sue, claimed to hear a rustling sound coming from inside the narrow tube, and with the team having already been experiencing a strange feeling, they elected not to go any further. One of the most intriguing aspects of his discovery was the then head of Egyptian Antiquities, Zahi Hawass, after being notified by Andrew of his discovery, claimed he was fully aware of the cave and claimed it was nothing. Yet since Andrew notified Zahi Hawass and released his findings, the tunnel has been closed off to the public without further information or investigation. Thoth and or Tahuti were associated with the ibis, of which Andrew believes was the animal of the cult that was using this cave system many generations ago. We will come back to the ibis later. The Tomb of the Birds later featured in many publications and even on the History Channel documentary, where it was revealed 2 staircases just inside the entrance to the cave. Some sources have claimed the previously mentioned narrow passage or tube went far deeper than Andrew and his wife had gone. Obviously, Giza has plenty of underground tunnels and shafts, from caverns under the plateau to the Osiris shaft and tomb, but Gebel Gibleh, a mound or raised elevation at the south end of the plateau, means southern mount, also meaning to fire, or as the natives told Andrew, the first place of the beginning. The link to fire makes me think of Hephaestus. The Egyptian creation story and the Nubian creation story, which was the culture to the south in modern-day Sudan, starts with water and a mound of earth, much like many other creation stories, to be fair. The Egyptians also believed the souls of the dead had to battle their way through 12 chambers of hell, overcoming demons and monsters, crossing over lakes of fire, and finding their way past gates guarded by fire-breathing serpents. So as you can see, the number 12 is a correlation, and we are seeing it repeat throughout this text. Now, the emerald tablets, 12 tablets passed down from Thoth, or the Greek Hermes, described in magnificent detail how he allegedly came to the land of Kem, or Egypt, as a ruling Atlantean, son of a great leader who was versed in the sciences and knowledge of the Atlantean culture. Thoth claimed to have lived amongst his own kin in a city on an island called Undal, the Atlanteans themselves living separate from their subjects who thrived in 10 mortal cities of the Atlantean kingdom. After a great cataclysm that brought about the destruction of the kingdom, believed to be in the Western Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules, according to Plato, Atlantis was a naval power lying in front of the Pillars of Hercules that conquered many parts of Western Europe and Africa 9,000 years before the time of Solon, which was approximately around 9600 BC. Getting back to Thoth, he was forced into his ship with only a handful of his fellow Atlantean brothers and sisters, and fled the destruction of Atlantis. Thoth, after fleeing towards the rising sun, landed in Kem, and subduing the barbaric Egyptians with magic and wisdom, won over the population. Thoth then hid his ship underground on the Giza Plateau. After some time teaching the people of Kem, he blasted a shaft to the infamous Amenti, to which he built a great pyramid above, a place where dwelt supernatural and immortal beings. I quote from the Emerald Tablets now. In the great city of Kio, on the island of Undal, in a time far past, I began this incarnation, not as the little men of the present age, but as did the mighty ones of Atlantis live and die, but rather from eon to eon did they renew their life in the halls of Amenti, where the river of life flows eternally onward. Deep in earth's heart lie the halls of Amenti, far beneath the islands of sunken Atlantis, halls of the dead and halls of the living, bathed in the fire of the infinite all. Unquote. Thoth's qualities were not solely venerated by the Egyptians, but also by the Greeks, to their closest matching god, Hermes, with whom Thoth was associated with Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice great, 3 times great, also leading Herodotus to naming Thoth's cult centre at Hermopolis, meaning city of Hermes, on the border between Upper and Lower Egypt, not far from Lake Maurice. The Romans later venerated Thoth as Mercury and came to believe that the god Hermes was responsible for all human knowledge. This esoteric teaching was an important rival to early Christianity. Enoch, being associated with the cult of Hermes, was extraordinarily popular. Many magical ideas from the Renaissance up to the present day were spawned by the mind-bending ideological principles of Hermetic teachings. This is a topic we shall visit another day perhaps. The name Pelasgians mentioned by Herodotus was used by classical Greek writers to refer either to predecessors of the Greeks or to the inhabitants of Greece before the emergence or arrival of the Greeks. Samothrace was an island of the great gods, referred by mythology as Island of Aelius, is dominated by Mount Sios, the highest mountain in the Aegean. Legend has it that Poseidon sat on top to watch the Great War of Troy. The Hermetic teachings of Thoth or Hermes was around long before the current crop of Hellenes and Egyptians in 450 BC or the Egyptians in 450 BCE. Who knows how far back the current group had occupied those lands is open for interpretation. Alas, a clear sign of the esoteric knowledge was being taught before they migrated into those areas and became great civilizations we know today as the Egyptian and Greek empires. The teaching of the Emerald Tablet was also known as the Smaragdini Tablet or the Tabula Smaragdina, which is a compact and cryptic hermetic text that was highly regarded by Islamic and European alchemists as the foundation of their art. The legendary Hellenistic figure Hermes Trismegistus is believed to have written this text in Thoth's third incarnation or return from Amenti. The text of the Emerald Tablet first appears, however, in a number of early medieval Arabic sources, the oldest of which dates to the late 8th century or early 9th century. This work was translated into Latin several times in the 12th and 13th centuries. Numerous interpretations and commentaries followed. Kitab Sir al-Asar, a book of advice to kings which was translated into Latin by Joannes Hispanianus 1140 and Philip Tripoli circa 1243. The Kitab Sir al-Asrar was a compendium of advice for rulers in Arabic, which purports to be a letter from Aristotle to Alexander the Great. This work was translated into Latin as Secretum Secretorum, the Secret of Secrets, by Joannes Hispanianus or Hispanianus, otherwise known as John of Seville, circa 1140, and by Philip of Tripoli, circa 1243. The cult teachings became very popular in the 19th and 20th centuries also, as occultists and esoterists, among whom the expression "as above so below," a modern phrase of the second verse from the tablet, has become an often cited motto, which makes me think of the Herodotus reference of the two giant pyramids, 50 furlongs above water and 50 furlongs below water, having two colossal seated figures on top of each. The emerald tablets themselves allegedly consisted of 12 tablets of emerald green formed from a substance created through alchemical transmutation. They are believed to be imperishable, resistant to all elements and substances. The tablets themselves have never been authenticated in the eye of the general public, yet has held significant persuasion throughout the millennia. In medieval times, the emerald tablet of Gothic kings of Spain and Sacro Catino, a dish said to have belonged to the Queen of Sheba and to have been used at the Last Supper of Christ, contained texts from the emerald tablets. The number 12 may be significant. Leonardo da Vinci, in his painting of the Last Supper, seemingly depicts potentially the 12 constellations of the zodiac in the painting, and as mentioned, during this period of time, some call the Renaissance, the emerald tablet and teaching of Thoth and Hermes were highly venerated and highly used during this period for the arts and the sciences. The repetition of the number 12 with the zodiac constellations all over the world, and how each culture came to have calendars and cycles revolving around the equinoxes. The number 12 appears a lot in the Bible, long believed to be the westernized version of allegorical references to the emerald tablet. Revelation 21:16, 17. The New Jerusalem, which is made in heaven and brought to the earth by God himself, contains 12 gates, made of pearl, that are each manned by an angel. 12,000 from each tribe of Israel, 144,000 in total, will receive salvation during the end times, Great Tribulation. Revelation 7. Solomon appointed 12 officers over Israel. If anyone is aware of Santos Benucci's work, for example, he and others believe that Solomon means soul of man, but I digress on that one. The scriptures, first recording of Jesus' words, occur when he is 12 years old. The high priest's breastplate, also called the breastplate of decision, had 12 stones embedded in it. Each stone represented a tribe of Israel, some believing this to be the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Herodotus makes mention also of the place of the 12 kings on the lower level of the labyrinth, to which he was denied access by the priests and the keepers of the labyrinth, as the sepulchres of the 12 unified kings and the repositories of the holy crocodiles were housed on the lower level. So to bring this video to a conclusion, I've laid out what information I could find regarding the labyrinth and associations in and around the labyrinth. There are a number of theories from all over the place, and to be honest, I didn't really want to put a theory on this myself. I just wanted to draw attention to some of the similarities and some of the references made throughout history around this labyrinth. In the year 2022, a lot of our ancient monuments have been either destroyed or lost through human destruction or cataclysmic events. So the fact that the labyrinth is still there, and if people acted quickly, then we could gain access to the halls of the labyrinth and potentially even the lower levels. As mentioned, the water table in the areas is rising due to damming of the Nile. So unfortunately, it's not like people can just go there and try and do what they can and get in there and make discoveries. This is going to take a large effort coming from the very top. It's going to take a lot of funding, a lot of manpower, and a lot of effort. Unfortunately, that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. So I just wanted to document, like I say, some of the correlations and some of the interconnecting things around the area. As Strabo said, I believe, he makes reference to there was another building outside of the labyrinth, and from this other building you could go underground and gain access to other locations via underground passageways. Who knows, perhaps that runs all the way up to Giza and all the way to Heliopolis. You know, there could be a large underground network that we haven't even got close to discovering at this moment in time. And I don't understand that there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily believe that Egypt, as it stands in today's view of antiquity, was that powerful nation. I'm on the fence with that, so I'll digress on that one. And of course, there was mention of a pyramid being at the place of the labyrinth. Now, where Crocodipolis is and this labyrinth next to Lake Maurice, you also have the Step Pyramid. Now, this pyramid was believed to have once been the same as the other pyramids, like finely encased with limestone and stuff like that. So that's just another strong indicator that this labyrinth is in the right place and more work needs to be done on that location. But I'm going to leave it there, guys. Like I say, it was a bit of a long one. I'm sure you're probably sick of the sound of my voice. If anyone's got any additional information to add to this, please, by all means, put it down in the comment section. And if you haven't already, give it a like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.